peoples of Slavic descent need to be unified, and so everybody's always like kind of fighting over who's going to be protectors of the Slavs. But if you see from this stance, what is East for them? East is this, right? They want this stuff, and they end up getting this stuff in the East. What does it also mean? There is a natural competition between Prussia, and because Prussia will become the force that unites Germany, you know, this whole idea of the German motherland that will want to push East against Russia, and Hitler will kind of bring this to a head. That's kind of, he kind of takes these old ideas of Drang nach Osten. Actually, it's a nach with no T, so Drang nach Osten. Anyway, okay, so guys you need to know. Okay, let's try and do this quickly. I'll try and do this in less than like 15 minutes. Frederick William, the Great Elector, 1640 to 1688. Okay, 1640 to 1688. He couple things that he does. He presides over the end of the 30 Years' War, so he helps kind of like bring the 30 Years' War to a close in Germany, and is able to get those territories at the end. See these territories, Pomerania. So Frederick William the Great Elector, Magdeburg, right? Frederick William the Great Elector, 1640 to 1688. End of the 30 Years' War. He presides over the Battle of Warsaw, which is in 1656, which is kind of finally gets Sweden out of Northern Europe. Finally gets, so 1656, the Battle of Warsaw. Warsaw is somewhere around here. So he finally gets, Sweden's still kind of hanging around, finally gets Warsaw out of there. Berlin is obviously their capital, but that's an aside. Frederick William the Great Elector will create a army of 40,000 soldiers by 1678. By 1678, so they are rapidly becoming a force to be reckoned with. But he will kind of keep the army at 40,000 because, you know, they really can't support that much more. But armies were, except for Louis XIV's army, which was just massive, armies really didn't need to be that much bigger than 40 or 50,000. Especially if they were trained really, really, really well. An army of 50,000 could beat a much bigger army if it was trained really well and had better tactics and had better equipment, and Prussia usually had that. Mostly because all their middle class and all their nobility were all just geared towards the military. It was like this militaristic state. Okay, so 40,000 soldiers by 1648. They're all about mercantilism. We've covered mercantilism before, but mercantilism, and I've also mentioned the Edict of Potsdam in 1685. As soon as Louis XIV issues the Edict of Fontainebleau that like expels all the Huguenots, essentially exiling his middle class. We know how well that turned out for Spain. Frederick William the Great Elector says, hey, we'll take you. We know that, right? The next guys you need to know. From 1688 to 1701, there's like a rapid succession of guys. You don't need to know them, okay? They don't matter. The next ones you need to know are Frederick the First, 1701 to 1713. So he presides over the War of Spanish Succession. That's Frederick the First. He is succeeded. So that's again Frederick the First, 1701 to 1713. He is succeeded by Frederick William the First, 1713 to 1740. So again, Frederick the First, 1701 to 1713. Frederick William the First, 1713 to 1740. Then the big guy that you need to know, Frederick II, aka Frederick the Great, reigns from 1740 to 1786. He is considered the great enlightened despot. We will get into enlightened despotism later. But they are very much like like Sparta, if you go back to your Greek history, very militaristic, very small, but very, very feisty. So let's see. How did Prussia use its small size to its advantage in the 17th century? As I said, small, 40,000 men. If you have an army of 40,000 men, you're pretty much good. The thing about Prussia is that everything is geared towards the small Prussian state. And remember how France has to like fight against those ancient rights of all those different provinces, and they have to like, Colbert has to like, make that trade union, the 5 great farms, and like kind of try and break down those ancient rights. Prussia doesn't have to do that because they started small, right? So they really don't have any competition in terms of any other nobility. It's the Junkers, it's the Hohenzollern family, and it's just like they just start building out from there, and they subjugate anybody that might even come across their path. So remember that Sweden was playing a part, but they will not play a part so much after that Battle of Warsaw in Northern Europe. They will still be fighting with the Russians until like 1718, but Sweden's not playing a part really. Prussia is going to dominate Northern Europe and obviously they're going to unify Germany, as we know. Remember, it's a large, we're up in the German plains here. So remember that when you're in the German plains, there's not a lot here. Let's go to this over here. When you're in the German plains, right? This is by 1795. When you're in the German plains, there's not much holding you back from expanding. There's no natural frontiers, so obviously they want to expand. They want to unify that those 3 major areas that I showed you before. Let's go back here. Okay, they eventually want these 3 areas. They want to unify this area with this area with this area. Okay. So I've already talked about Frederick William, the Great Elector, a little bit. He really turns everything around. I mean, he comes to power in 1640. Berlin's population had fallen to 6,000 people. 6,000 people in Berlin. He was committed to building a great army, committing to having Prussia become this militarized state, but being careful not to use the army unnecessarily. Right? He's not about like going on some grand like, oh my gosh, I'm going to conquer Spain and I'm going to conquer the Spanish Netherlands like Louis XIV. He's very, very smart about it, very calculated. So Frederick Williams, the next guy we need to remember, Frederick I, who rules from 1701 to 1713. He's the guy who basically, in the War of Spanish Succession, he offers just 8,000 soldiers to the Holy Roman Emperor, the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor. I believe it was... who was it? Who was the Holy Roman Emperor during the? It was Leopold I. He offers 8,000 soldiers to Leopold I in the War of Spanish Succession, but in return he says, "I want to be named king. I want to be king of Prussia, Brandenburg, Prussia." And the Holy Roman Emperor says, "Fine." So that kind of is a nice moment for the Prussian Hohenzollern dynasty. They are now allowed to be called king. So he's the only German king while all the other rulers are only princes. So obviously they are using the balance of power very well. They are going to use their army to whatever end they can. We already talked about the Baltic Barons part, the descendant of Teutonic Knights. I don't want to go into that again. Okay, how did militarism infuse the Prussian state? Okay, so Prussia's uniqueness was not in its interest in military improvement, but in the proportion between its investment in the military and its meager resources. So let me explain. So the army is basically like anything that they can put into the army, they will. So it develops a life of its own, and it develops a life that's independent kind of and more durable than the state itself. And really, this lasts until after World War II. The militarism that Nazi Germany will